We're looking at now radical expressions and functions, and we're going to start out with the square root. And we're going to define essentially what these things are. This is pointing to the symbol, and the symbol is called a radical. And what's under the radical is going to become important to us. It's called the radicand. So radical and radicand. And we're going to be looking at square roots. So we could say that the square root of, make sure I know what my list is here, square root of 81, what's the square root of 81? 9. And this is because, and this is important, if I square 9, I get 81. So what square root does, it's the unsquarer. So it says, I've got a number which is squared. Tell me what number you squared to get it. It's the unsquarer. The square root of 100 is 10, and that's because 10 squared is 100. So if I took the square root of 100, 100 is a square. I want to know what did I square to get that number. That's what square root does. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 1 over 49 is 1 over 7. 1 times 1 is 1. 7 times 7 is 49. Now, here's a square root, but it's got this addition thing. And that says there's a set of parentheses there that joins it. So additions, remember, hang on to either side. So that says there's really a set of parentheses. You always do parentheses first. So you're going to add 144 and 25. You get 169. And the square root of 169 is 13. Thank you. Now, you cannot take the square root of a negative number. And that's because if I'm doing a square, that's a number times itself. That's what essentially a square is. So that says if the number is positive, a positive times a positive is a positive. Because it's got to be the same number, right? And a negative times a negative is a positive. So there's always going to be a positive number underneath that radical, because the signs have to be the same. So what we have is that if you have the square root of a negative number, for the moment we say this is not a real number. It is a number, it's a number called an imaginary number, but we don't get to that until 7-8. So it's not a real number. So I can't have a negative number under the radical. However, I can have one outside. Well, why? Because this says take the opposite of the square root of 16. What's under the radical is positive, so it's the opposite of 4 or negative 4. So can't have a negative number under the radical. If I want to evaluate the square root, if f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 3, this is the square root of x is 28 minus 3, which is the square root of 25, and the square root of 25 is 5. F of negative 1 says I've got the square root of negative 1 minus 3, which is the square root of negative 4. And what do I know about the square root of negative 4? It's not a real number. Not a real number.